Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we are going to be taking a look at the damage done to Indian industry due to the unfair dumping of goods, foreign goods and the absence of a level playing field to the Indian industry and domestic produce. So we're going to be taking a look at what are the anti-dumping measures in place, what are the safeguards in place for our Indian industry and domestic manufacturers. Joining me on the discussion today is Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya. He is the president at the Center for Digital Economy and Policy Research. We have Mr. A.K. Gupta. He is a former Indian Cost Account Services officer, and he's also the founder of TPM Consultancy, which is a trade remedies consulting entity. Also joining us is Mr. Rajamani. He is the president at the Indian Stainless Steel Development Association. So we're going to be talking to these experts and people who are stakeholders and have an inside view on the industry and what is happening. But first, Dr. Jayajit, if you can just explain to our viewers exactly what the problem is and what we're going to be looking at in today's discussion.
Sure. In fact, Priya, you mentioned the word anti-dumping duty. So we need to first understand what this is.
Okay.
So we all know that India went down the path of liberalization in 1991. Wherein large duties were reduced. So we had duties of 120%, 150%. They were reduced to 10%, 15%. Now, when you do that, that exposes the Indian industry to predatory pricing. So what is predatory pricing? It's that if I need to destroy the Indian industry, I'll then start selling goods at a price point which is below the total cost of manufacturing. Right? And this, what it leads to is access to the Indian market and unfair competition. So if you are selling, let's say, toys at 100 rupees, I'll start selling them at 50 rupees. So I might even incur a loss, or I might just do it above my operational cost. The resultant outcome will be that you will not be able to produce and sell anything in your own market. So I'm denying market access to you. Therefore, to safeguard that, what the WTO had given a few mechanisms to protect the Indian market from such predatory pricing. These are safeguards that all countries in the world have.
All right.
One of them is anti-dumping duty. So from 1991 till roughly about August 2021, the Indian government had done detailed research in terms of which are the industries which are getting impacted. Based on that research, they had made recommendations. And most of these recommendations, 99.5% of these recommendations were accepted and implemented. These detailed research is done by an organization called DGTR, which is the Directorate General of Trade Remedies under Ministry of Commerce.
Okay.
What we suddenly see from roughly around September of 2021 is that many of these recommendations by DGTR is getting rejected. What that means is that a lot of companies are shutting down because they can't compete. They can't compete not because they're not competitive, but they can't compete because there is unfair pricing happening on the other side, because it's in a war in a different way. When you do war, you basically try to get market access and you try to get access to resources. If you can do it through through pricing differentials and pricing it at a price lower than the production price, then you have achieved the same purpose. Once the domestic industry gets wiped out, who then manufactures these goods, and then the prices are brought back to usurious levels. Let me just go back to 1815 for a moment. Is that when the Indian shipping industry was dominating global shipping and it was decimating the British ships, the British shipwrights went to the king and said, look, if you don't stop the Indian ships from being dominant, then when your Royal Navy needs help, we will not be around. We'll obviously starve to death because we can't compete with the Indian ships. So the British government at that time passed legislation which put unfair, massive amount of taxes on the Indian ships above 300, which were below 300 tons. This was made to make sure that the British industry gets protected. Now, that was protectionism. What we are talking about is plain safeguards of the Indian industry. We want a level playing field. And if that doesn't happen, we are ending up losing lots of jobs. And you would read in the newspapers that imports are going up. This is one of the key reasons why imports are actually going up in the country.
Who's rejecting the duties? The Ministry of Commerce has recommended the anti-dumping duties.
Right. So there is a process that's followed in the country where one ministry which is responsible for ensuring the growth of the industry in this country, they do this research, which is Ministry of Commerce. Then it's submitted to Ministry of Finance because larger interests of the country needs to be looked at. So if there is a geopolitical implication of certain duties being put in, then that is considered. But largely that is always cleared by Ministry of Finance. It's a check and balance that is put into place. Somehow that balance has changed, and the industry is very curious why that is happening, especially when this government and our government has come out with a clear policy on Atmanirbhar, which the entire industry is cheering.
Exactly.
Every single person, every child, in fact, knows the word Atmanirbhar, and they're all cheering for it and rooting for it. Then why is there a different kind of a reaction from another part of the government? That is a little perplexing.
Perplexing. Can you throw some light on the problem or further explain the problem? What are the sectors that you feel, are any particular sectors being targeted, Mr. Rajmani, or is this a general application to all?
No, it is general to all the industries. Particularly, I can throw light on stainless steel industry, which I am representing. Currently, what happened is there was a CVD on stainless steel imports from China, which was imposed in 2017.
CVDs?
CVD is countervailing duty,
Okay.
which was imposed after doing all the due diligence by DGTR, and it was a proper methodology basis on which the CVD was imposed. And the duration was for the period of 5 years, and which was supposed to be reviewed in September 2022. But what happened is in 1st February 2021, Ministry of Finance took a precipitated action and announced in the budget saying that we are suspending this duty with immediate effect. And again on 30th September 2021, they said the suspension will further extended till 31st January 2022. And on 1st February 2022, they revoked this duty. Now, basis which, one of the companies, they went to Gujarat High Court, they got a favorable order saying that the thing, which basis which the duty was revoked is not right. So it should follow a proper sunset review by the DGTR, and basis on which DGTR followed the sunset review process, and they came up with a recommendation on 6th April, and they said that there is an injury on the 200 series, which is predominantly used by the MSME segment.
Okay.
And it is used for kitchenware and utensils. I would because people wanted to know what is 200 series. So it's a lower grade which is predominantly used for kitchenware and utensils industry. We call it as a Lagu Udyog, which is there in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and in our Wazirpur, Haryana, Jagadri, and all these places. So there are around 600 MSMEs, who have been surviving only because of this, and they don't have any alternate product profiles with which they can say, for example, if I am facing a problem in a particular product segment, I can switch over to some other product segment where I can be profitable. But here, that case is not applicable to them because they know only how to make utensils and they know only how to make 200 series, and it has come hard on them. So if you take a total scenario, the MSME segment, it is around 600 units which is there across India, out of which around 80 are induction furnace manufacturers and around 500 plus is the steel re-rollers. Okay. So the MSME segment is a labor intensive segment, and as I mentioned, it is around 600 people across India, out of which 80 is induction furnace manufacturers and rest of them are re-rollers. And out of induction furnace, around almost 17 to 18 companies have been shut down. And on re-rollers also around 60 people have shut down their operations. And there is a total
employment. So how many percent of the industry has been affected?
Almost 25% is shut down.
Has the Steel Ministry not taken cognizance of the fact or said anything?
No, they have taken cognizance. In fact, they have recommended it to Ministry of Finance to, there is a need for imposing CVD as per the recommendation by the DGTR. But it is still not yet come.
Still in the entry. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Gupta, you are an expert on trade laws. So you can, if you can just help us understand the problem vis-a-vis also what the global practice is.
So two things I think I would like to tell you here is that one is that we follow a two-tier structure where DGTR makes a recommendation after an elaborate investigation, and thereafter Ministry of Finance decides whether to implement the recommendation or not.
Right.
A couple of countries also have a two-tier structure. But if we really look at past history, as Dr. Jajit said, we were really having practically less than 1% rejection rate. But in the current situation, we are facing around 60% of the rejection rate. The rejections are happening by Ministry of Finance, reasons for which are not known to the industry concerned.
Can protectionism be one reason, or is it?
It's a widespread myth that anti-dumping or anti-subsidies are in the nature of protections. They are actually in the nature of remedies. The fault lies with the exporter. It is the exporter or exporting country who has resorted to subsidizing the goods or selling the product at unfair price. So Indian industry is only looking at remedying that adverse effect of that.
Okay.
If you look at the global situation, I would say that rather than really looking the way we are looking in India, globally, in fact, countries have gone more aggressive on trade remedies. In fact, we have seen how US and Europe has gone more so aggressive on this. In stainless steel, for example, Europe has imposed anti-subsidy duty on Indian exports, then they impose anti-dumping, and on top of that, there's a safeguard duty already in place. So globally, governments have gone to protect their own manufacturing, but we are finding just the opposite happening
We
in
are
India.
diluting our own institutional mechanism.
I would say that as far as investigating authority is concerned, they are performing their job. But as far as the Ministry of Finance concerned, they believe that this is in the nature of a sovereign function, whether they would like to impose or not impose. And in the because of the sovereign powers, they have been considering that they would not like to impose duties wherever they feel it's not necessary.
Okay, so Rajmani gave us the example of the steel industry, but supposing, is this also happening in, say, the medicine industry, or, other?
So we do have some past examples. We have a very interesting example of penicillin G, where a recommendation was made by DGTR for imposition of duty. Prices of penicillin G at that point in time must have been something like $6 to $13. It's more than 15 years now. After the recommendation was rejected by Ministry of Finance, India was totally out of penicillin G. Now the government has understood how important the product is, and the product has been brought under PLI.
How important is the product?
The government has now brought the product into PLI, and there is now a new company who is setting up manufacturing facility for penicillin G. When you look at the import price now, the penicillin G price now is between $35 to $45. In fact, it's a matter of really a good research to be done that to what extent these measures actually have helped the country. And as a trade law expert, I have been repeatedly saying that probably these measures have helped not only the manufacturers but also the consumer as also the public at large.
Okay.
In fact, we have got by now more than 1,200 recommendations. I am yet to come across, barring some exceptions, a situation where there have been a widespread adverse effect of these measures or a widespread abuse of these remedies by the trade and industry.
I remember during COVID there was a shortage of vitamin C also, was.
Yeah, it's another interesting case which I think is important for us to consider. Vitamin C during COVID period, we had huge demand. That was a time when China in fact reduced supplies to India. The prices had gone up, but not that alarmingly high. It was Indian industry who came to the rescue of the country. In fact, most of the vitamin C at that point in time was being bought directly by the government owned or controlled entities. I don't know whether you are aware or not, the price of vitamin C which you pay in the market, if you look at the drug price, it's anywhere between 10% to 20% only. So if you look at the really impact of anti-dumping on vitamin C, you would really not find it in 2 or 3 digits of a decimal. But still, the recommendation made by DGTR on vitamin C has been turned down by Ministry of Finance. Interestingly, this is another product whose intermediate chemical ministry has given a PLI for that.
Okay.
So chemical ministry is proposing to enhance production by giving PLI protection, but vitamin C imports are now being freely allowed, a result of which is after the recommendation was rejected, there's a very significant increase in import of vitamin C from China.
To take a break, but I'm going to come and ask you, to help us understand the extent of the problem and why is India so prone to dumping. But I'm going to take a quick break and come back and continue the conversation. Hello and welcome back to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we are taking a look at the Indian industry and how it's being affected by anti-dumping duties and what the impact it's having on domestic manufacturing at a time where, Jajit, you said Atmanirbhar is really the slogan of the day.
Right. I think this government has done brilliant work in terms of really developing the Indian industry. If you look at the case that Mr. Gupta just mentioned about penicillin G, penicillin G is very critical for the soldiers. That's their go-to drug when they get injured. Otherwise, they'll get gangrene and so on and so forth. So it's a very important part of our defense in that sense. So just like the British example I was giving, where their shipping industry was critical to the Royal Navy in 1815, similarly, penicillin G is very important to our soldiers. If that industry gets killed, which we successfully killed 15 years back, and in fact, it was driven by PSUs. So there were 4 PSUs that were actually running that industry. We successfully killed all of those 4 PSUs.
By encouraging cheap Chinese imports.
By encouraging not just cheap, but dumping. Now, cheap is different. If the Chinese are able to produce it cheap, then they're most welcome. Because at the end of the day, the consumer should pay less, right? But if they're dumping, that is a criminal activity. That's a different issue altogether. So this whole conversation is about safeguards. We are not talking about giving unfair, protection to the Indian industry. We are saying safeguard the Indian industry, give a level playing field. That's a minimal that is being asked for. Now, this issue is not just constrained to either steel
first finish the
or
penicillin example. I interrupted you then.
Yeah, so penicillin is extremely important. Now that we don't have any local manufacturers, we're importing everything. And guess from which country? Largely it's from China.
Okay.
Now again, that's not a problem. But when there is a issue between the geopolitical issue that crops up, a simple stoppage of penicillin G will bring us down to the knees. Same as what happened in terms of vitamin C during the COVID situation. Okay. So we are exposed to that vulnerability when at one end we are trying to develop a short supply chain. At the other end we are saying, no, we'll not encourage that. This is conflicting, right? Again, as I said, Atmanirbharta is a brilliant step by the government, and because of which the government has also introduced another step called production-linked incentives, PLI. That was a strategy which helped us develop our car industry. It's one of the largest in the world now. We can develop an entire car indigenously in this country, which very few other nations have the capability of. Now we are doing the same thing with all other industries. We are saying if you can indigenize more and more part of your industry, we'll give you some incentives in terms of tax break, right? What we find is in many industry, the end product is under PLI, which is the production linked incentive, but the components need safeguard from dumping, but that is being denied. Now that's conflicting. We should make up our mind. Do we want a assured supply chain or we do not want that? Okay. If we need an assured supply chain, then we do need safeguards for our industry. We cannot afford to lose the thousands of jobs that Mr. Krishnamurthy has mentioned. We need to have our industry preserved so that they can provide to us when we need those goods from them.
Okay. So, Krishna, you wanted to add to the conversation, and also, at the end of the day, what are the remedial measures open to someone like you, apart from the courts, a tribunal, the Commerce Ministry has suggested, the Finance Ministry has rejected. Now what happens?
See, as Mr. Gupta said and also Jajit said, every country has protected their industry. Okay. Unfortunately, we are lagging behind. I won't say we are not doing it, but we are lagging behind. And if you ask for the per se the stainless steel industry, it is all the raw materials are imported from outside, and China having all these raw materials in abundance. And what they have done, they have put export duty on these raw materials to the tune of between 25 to 40%. That means if China's producer is getting that raw material at 100, I am paying 140 to get that raw material to India. So I am already 40% up in compared to competition. And then over and above, I am getting all these problems, and I am not getting any kind of remedies from our government, which is, I think, is the need of the hour. Because even SAIL, which is a major PSUs, and they have lost a tremendous amount of market on this, almost 78% on the 200 series itself, although they have diverged into other product profile, but 200 series is their bread and butter. Okay. So they lost the market the same, and we are giving it on a platter to someone like China.
So remedies kya hai, Mr. Gupta?
So in terms of remedies, I think we talk of tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers. In terms of tariff barriers, we have anti-dumping, anti-subsidy safeguard. As I mentioned to you, we had invoked these measures in more than 1,050 cases. there have been several success stories that how imposition of these measures have helped the not
let's
only the
hear a success
manufacturers
story. That's a good
but also how it has helped in capacity creation, fresh investment, employment generation. There have been several stories that in fact it has brought the prices down and not increased.
Which
In
sector?
fact,
Give me
ever
one
since,
example.
for example, this kitchenwares which you use, we demonstrated that how price of this kitchenware in fact in last 10 years has come down rather than going up. In fact, ever since this issue has come up, more than 150 recommendations by DGTR, what they have now started doing is that they started quantifying that what's going to be the impact of this proposed duty if the price of the product goes up by the quantum of duty. Because that's the maximum which can happen. Though we have demonstrated the industry doesn't increase price by the quantum of duty, but even if you assume that the price will increase by the quantum of duty, the impact in these more than 150 recommendations all along has been below 1%. Now just imagine when your eventual end product price will not even increase by 1%, but you are going to sustain manufacturing in the country. What is the balance of the country? Do we really need manufacturing or do we want to allow imports? We also demonstrated that when low price imports are coming into the country, there is hardly any evidence that in fact your eventual public at large has got benefited. There is no such benefit in studies available. See, by allowing dumping, you not benefited the consumer, the ultimate public at large. By invoking measures, there is no evidence that your public at large has suffered. So where is the balance of interest lies for the country? That's a question probably that needs to be answered.
Good question. Final word to you, Jajit.
So I think I'll pick up from what Mr. Gupta was mentioning is that it's not just an issue of only China, it's Germany, it's South Korea, it's many other countries. And we need to make sure that we have the safeguards in place because it's about jobs and it's about industry security, but also about security for the country. Again, going back, if we don't get vitamin C when we need it, or we don't get penicillin G when we need it, that's quite disastrous for the country. You can't make industries overnight. So if an industry dies, it takes humongous amount of effort and policy push to make sure that that industry revives. And again, in the context that this government is so focused on strengthening our industry, in creating jobs, in growing the economy, it continues to be perplexing as to why another arm of the government is not allowing these benefits to come in. Now, let me also take an example of what is protectionism. Protectionism is what US is doing, where they have increased the duties on everything coming from China at a massive level. That is not what we are doing, although that's perhaps what we should also be doing, but we're not even reaching there. All we are saying is please provide safeguards so that that our industry is not exposed to predatory pricing, to unfair pricing, and to an unlevel playing field in a manner that our industry does not get access to our own market. That is very, a deep matter of concern.
Well, thank you all. I think a much deeper discussion is also needed, but at least we've outlined the problem that is being faced by our own Indian industry, domestic manufacturers at a time where, we are focusing on them, trying to make India self-reliant. Then why are we, in a way, cutting our nose to spite our face? Why are all the ministries not acting in conjunction towards a common goal? That is something that's been pretty well articulated here. Thank you so much for this discussion and joining me on this show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.